So we'll go ahead and get started. And as people come in, we'll see them as they arrive, and hopefully they will put where they're from and their name in the chat and their church perhaps. But I'll start off by introducing myself. You may not, some of you may know me or may know my name, but I'm Amy Vaughn, and I am the pastor of what I call the Lakeshore Collective. And it's in Lincoln and Catawba County. And it's one of those emerging faith communities that you may have heard the bishop or other people talking about, that is one of the 17 emerging faith communities. There are two other community pastors who are uh, presenting with me this morning, and Susan and Laura will introduce themselves in just a bit. And we're going to share a little bit of information with you this morning. But I wanted to start us off with a prayer. And so I adapted one of my favorite John Wesley prayers and changed the language to, take out the hows and these and make it a little bit more modern. So I invite you, wherever you are, to go in prayer with me. Oh, that we could begin this day in devout meditations, in joy unspeakable, and in blessing and praising you, O God, who gives us such good hope and everlasting compassion. Lift up our minds above all these little things, the minutiae of our lives, and keep us focused on your vision for a world of peace, justice, and love. May we focus on these things until our hearts are fully bent to seek you every day, following in the way of Jesus. Lord, we ask that you bless our time together as we discuss with unity of spirit how we can best love you and love our neighbors. In your holy name we pray. Amen. So if you are just joining us, I invite you to put where you're coming from this morning, your church or your community. And we're talking this morning, there's three of us emerging community pastors on the call this morning. And we're going to share a little bit with you about what we are doing. And we're basically co-creating and new and renewed communities for discipleship, worship, and mission. And we are all experimenting in different ways with how to gather God's people together and how to walk with them in a united Methodist way of life together. All of us are intentionally reaching out to those who have been harmed or excluded from the church, and also people that are new to faith, to the faith journey. This is work that all of us do, whether we're emerging pastors or pastors at all. We do these in the emerging communities in a specific way. And we hope that this workshop will inspire you and make you find new ways or see new ideas about nurturing new and renewed faith gatherings in your communities. And we're going to give you some resources to do that too. We are hoping that you will come away with at least one idea, maybe more, on something that you can do, something specific that you can do in your faith gatherings where you are. We're going to ask that if you have questions that you jot them down in the chat, and we're going to allow some time at the end to answer some of those questions. If we don't get to them, we will try to answer those in a follow-up email later on. And don't forget, if you do unmute to say hello to someone, please mute yourself so that the sound quality is better for everyone. We appreciate you all being here this morning. And we're going to start off with Laura talking a little bit about what we mean by a skeptical world. So Laura, go ahead.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm glad for us to be together during this time. My name is Laura Alton, and I am one of the emerging community pastors in our conference. I serve as pastor of the South Point United Methodist Church in Belmont, and I am also really trying to strengthen United Methodist connections in the eastern part of Gaston County, and also noticing and cultivating some new fresh expressions and new faith gatherings in the eastern part of Gaston County. And so just glad to be able to share with you today. So the name of our workshop, of the seminar, is Creating Faith Gatherings in a Skeptical World. So we want to spend a bit of time thinking about that skeptical world. And I want to begin by posing a few questions that some of us have asked ourselves, why are people skeptical of church or religion? Or we may ask the question this way, why are people not coming to church the way they used to? Or why do people not think that it's important to raise their children in church? Or we might say this, we invite people to come to church, but they don't seem interested. Why is that? Uh, I would invite you now to think a bit lightheartedly, but to think about why, or to think about where people are if they're not in church on Sunday morning. So if they're not in church on Sunday morning, where are people? And I invite you to just put your responses in the chat. Again, we're being a bit lighthearted. We're not going to try to judge people, but we're just naming some places where people might be on Sunday morning if they're not in church. Okay. Yes. Yeah. All of this at home in their bed. Yes. Sleeping in. Yes. Yeah, watching online services, right? Yeah, yeah. The pre-games, yes. Or working, right. Yeah, yeah. So just yesterday, the the Pew Research Center, which is a research think tank that especially focuses on religion and faith, released a new survey. This is very timely. It was a new survey called Religious Nuns in America, who they are and what they believe. So the term nun, None, is used to describe those people who, when they're asked about their religious affiliation, they won't check the box that says Protestant and they won't check the box that says Catholic or any of the other options, except they will check the box that says none. And so this research revealed that 28% of people in our country have checked none. Now, as a comparison, in 2007, it was 16% of people who identified as none. And so you see the difference between then and now at 28%. And by this, they have now become the largest category of affiliation in the United States, surpassing Catholic and Protestant. So that made a headline yesterday, and Katie has put the link to that study in our chat if you want to check that out. I know they also had a story on that on National Public Radio yesterday where you can get some more information about that. Now, some of those nuns are the people that we've put in our chat that go to the lake or go to Walmart on Sunday morning. Not all of them, but some of them would be in that category. Some of the nuns are agnostic or atheist, but most of them are folks that are really identify themselves as nothing in particular. The majority of them, they just are not affiliated with any group and they don't consider themselves agnostic or atheist. Also, they're not necessarily opposed to religion or to church or to God or to a higher power. But almost all of the nuns, 90%, say that they seldom or never go to a religious service. So I just want to offer a summary of some of the general reasons that people are not interested or involved in church. So Dina, I see your question in the chat, and I would say that of the 28% of the nuns, they do not go to non-denominational. I think there is a category in this research study for those who go to non-denominational. So that 28% Those people who do not go anywhere, are not involved, are not interested, or they're atheist or agnostic? Thank you for that question. So a summary of the general reasons that people are not interested or involved in church would include the following. The church doesn't seem to share their values, especially on social issues. The church has no impact on their daily lives. And so this is about relevance. They don't find the church or religion relevant to their life. There is a decline in trust of clergy and organized religion. There is also this viewpoint for many, a perspective of many, that the church is judgmental or hypocritical. For some, it may be that in the church and in the messiness of relationships and community and even politics, which finds its way into all sizes of groups, that there's too much drama. There's too much drama. And for many, especially we could count this in the United Methodist circles, that there's pain and trauma that is associated with the conversations around disaffiliation. And perhaps for some, there's pain and trauma that they've experienced because of conflict or unhealthy or toxic relationships in any type of church. I would say with this, especially this new report that indicates that there's more and more people who consider themselves none, and as we think about the reasons why people are none, I would suggest that it is time for us to think about a pivot for our approach and a pivot in our thinking. It's important that we see this not as a problem to fix, but as a context that exists, that it is a reality of life in our day and time. And our pivot is that we see it as context, not as a problem, because we do not control it. And we would need to be okay to not control this context. It would be okay that we cannot solve this problem. But it is important to pivot toward the question, how can we be faithful and how can we be fruitful in ministry in this current context, in this current reality? And so the question for me now is, what are some ways that I can be faithful in this context? And so I want to indicate just a few, and then we are going to speak to some others as we move along in our time together. Studies do indicate, both in the Pew Research and studies like the Barna Group, which also works a lot with religious and faith issues, studies indicate that most people in the United States do believe in God or a higher power and would like to grow spiritually. And it doesn't mean they go to church on Sunday morning. Some of those would, obviously, but people being open to a higher power can mean for us not a hurdle or an obstacle to overcome, but perhaps a place for us to see as common ground, that is a starting point for conversations around faith or in building faith communities. Just that someone has an interest or has a positive belief in a higher power. We should not see that as an obstacle or as a problem or as a way or as what's the word I'm looking for that I'm losing that it's not a barrier. That's the word I'm looking for. It's not a barrier. A place of common ground and a starting point. I also think that this teaches us about our faithful response in this context, that we can stop being surprised or even angry and hurt that people have negative views of the church and or religion. Again, this is part of our context. But what that means is that instead of our energy being focused on how that feels hurtful or how we're surprised at that, we can put our energy elsewhere into being faithful in our context. I think the other side of that is that we should not assume that everyone who considers themselves a none, an None, that we should not assume that they will respond in a way that is negative or in a way that is combative or contradictory. Many nuns will welcome a conversation about faith. Listening is an essential skill in this new context, and we will talk more about that as we move on. And I think another thing that's important in this new context is that we reclaim our sense of authentic witness and a witness of integrity. Actions do speak louder than words, and it's important that actions and words are aligned. Saying and living out what we believe and what we profess, living into that, it counters hypocrisy and it can begin to build trust. Authenticity in a believer's life, it is in this current context what ordination and what the title of reverend or lay leader, what that was 50 years ago. It used to be that just that title and that position, it got your foot into the door. It gave you street cred to have conversations with people about faith. But that's no longer the case. Authenticity and a genuine spirit have replaced title and position. And this is powerful, and really in light of Jesus' ministry and example, where it has never been title or position or posturing that has held merit. I think that this is important in our society where we are debating. Now, this is the larger context of our society, where we are debating the merits of artificial intelligence or whether something is fake news or real news. And I could go on with examples of that in our larger context. One of the most important things with this context that we are in is that we hear over and over again, and studies show this, that when people who are considered nuns, when they have faith conversations, the most important thing is listening without judgment. That is the important thing. And so as we seek faithful and fruitful ministry in this context of a skeptical world, what are we as community pastors, what are we learning about creating new and renewed faith gatherings? We're going to share 5 things that we are learning: the importance of spiritual and missional grounding, the slow process of planting seeds, that no church or person is an island, that listening is the key, and that we are working beyond the walls of the church. So, Reverend Susan Ewing is going to begin by talking about the importance of spiritual and missional grounding.
Good morning. I am Susan Ewing, and I'm the emerging community pastor of Campfire Collective, which is kind of in the North Davidson, part of Winston, Forsyth County area. And I know some of you are not too far from me. When I began this appointment, of course, I met with my district superintendent, Sam Moore, and looking for a list of maybe some remnant people, different contexts than Laura. Laura shared with you that she had a church in her appointment. I do not have a church appointment. So I wanted to begin this work. I'm looking at who in that area, maybe their churches had disaffiliated. I had just a handful of remnant people. And part of my initial work was reaching out to those folks. And most all of them were looking for traditional churches, and we were able to connect them to a place of worship and a church where they could continue their faith journey. All of that meant I had nothing. I had no church. I had no folks. So where was I to start? And over and over again, Sam said, Susan, attend to your spiritual health. Attend to your spiritual disciplines. The best advice, in hindsight, looking back, the best advice. And so I did. I began immediately reading scripture every day, praying, writing down my thoughts, inviting a handful of my trusted friends who I know would pray for me. So I brought them into this experience as well. I also listened to as many podcasts about faith communities. I read lots of books and articles. I read a lot about the community itself. Where were people working? What's the history? Where's the new, where are people moving in? Where's the new growth? And so that was very important to just have this time of being in prayer with God while I was also gleaning information about where we were as a society, where this particular community was in their history. And so then I was able to go out into the community. And I, in the North Davidson area, the biggest employer is the school system. And so went to the school. I had some connections and was able to connect with some of the school counselors in the elementary schools, the high schools. But I also went to visit stores and restaurants, coffee shops. There was a winery that was close by. I would introduce myself. And I will tell you this, honestly, I did not get a warm welcome when I would go into these places, but I did find people willing to talk if I asked the right question. And here was the question I found was the one that got people excited. Where's a great place to eat? And that sounds really kind of simple, but that's really, we're like, oh, you got to go here and you got to go there. I would also ask, what do people do on the weekends? Where are people having fun? And that was well received. So I was able to glean a lot of information using those questions. Now, ironically, at annual conference, I had a lady delegate who came up to me and said, hey, I used to live in the North Davidson area. I was a school counselor there. I'm retired now. And so immediately a friendship took place. And so I texted her and I said, hey, can you show me around the area? So she was like my tour guide. And she knew a lot of people still in the school system. And keep in mind, that's the largest employer in the area. But one day we were riding around in her car and she was showing me the local winery. And she said, I've got to tell you how this began. And she said, the people who own this were also teachers and they were friends of mine, and they were experimenting and making wine in their home. And a lot of the teachers where I worked would gather at their house on Friday afternoon after work before they went home to cook dinner and get ready for the weekend. And they would just have a glass of wine and sit around and just kind of take a breath for the weekend. Eventually what happened was these two folks who they invited the teachers into their home, they opened this winery. It's very successful, very big part of that community. While she's telling me this in the car, I thought, oh my goodness, what a cool story. And I heard this nudge, this voice that said, hey, you know what? This is maybe something you could try. And I really was like, I don't know how do I even start that? And so she was able to connect me to some folks in the school system. I went and talked to some of the school counselors. Hey, I would love to try this with your teachers. Could I share a flyer? Could I do trying to get all the right places, get the right permission? They thought it was a great idea. Yes, we're super stressed. We know that kind of in our society that it's a very stressful public education right now. And so the principal thought it was a great idea. And then I hit a roadblock. The school board did not allow for folks to come in and pass out flyers. So I just thought I was going through the proper channels and just hit a snag. So that's when I thought, well, maybe I need to start some social media accounts so I can advertise. Maybe I can connect on social media in that area, kind of publicize, use social media as a virtual bulletin board. I will tell you honestly, as a mom of teens, I was not thrilled at all about this. We've had some negative experiences and I just was like, oh God, I don't want to do this. I just really don't want to go down that. And just started praying over that. And it just became more and more. And so I said, okay, I've got to use this as my bulletin board to get our events out, to get what we are, who we are, and to know that everyone's welcome. And so we began to advertise. And I put out there, we were going to try our Sips and Sighs. And that was the name of what I decided our Friday afternoon gatherings would be, a time to just unwind after work, catch your breath, get ready for the weekend. So I shared in several places. I sent out text to people I knew. I posted on Facebook, Instagram, all those things. I went to the first one. I was so excited, and I was there by myself. And so things were not really going the way I had imagined. So, but still, I really had this strong sense that God wanted me to continue doing this. And so I kept telling friends. I had teacher friends in other counties and other schools who said, oh, it's a great idea. This is good. I joined the North Davidson Facebook page, and I began to ask questions. Hey, what do people do on the weekend? Not just in those face-to-face encounters, but on social media. And a lot of those responses were, we go to Winston. And that's then the nudge I got to shift this Friday evening gatherings, we call it Sips and Sighs, to Winston. And so we began to gather on Friday evenings downtown. We would meet in local restaurants. People began to attend. The first time I had 3. And then a couple of weeks later, we had 6. And then a couple of weeks later, we have 8. And people are inviting friends. Now, all that to say, we are not where I thought we were going. I thought we were going to be at this winery with school teachers. Well, there's a couple of school teachers, but there's a lot of other folks who just, maybe they're experiencing stress in their lives, caring for adult children, caring for aging parents. Maybe their job's stressful. They're just really finding this a place to where they can just breathe and just slow down and get a blessing for the week. Now, this is an example of how my Friday night gathering came to be. But everything positive I have tried or experienced really started and was grounded in prayer. Even our name, Campfire Collective, and how the scripture connects to that. Our social media, all of that has come about because of prayer. And my simple prayer was this. And this was the prayer I prayed almost every day. God, if this is what you want from this emerging community, I need you to make it more and more. And if it's not, make it less and less. And so that's kind of how I just began the day. And it really did come to be. And so part of that, because I am praying, God, if this is what you want, make it more and more. Sometimes God's a little slower than me, right? In answering that prayer. And so in that in-between time of waiting, to see if, is this something you want me to move on? I would then, because I need to be doing something, I would attend to other things. I would see who else I could meet. Where else could I visit? What else could I learn about this community? And so what was really helpful for me is in this in-between time of waiting to get clarity of what God wanted from me, meeting new people, trying to sift and pray over new discoveries, I started ending the day writing down what happened. And I would just do bullets of that day, where I had gone, who I'd talked to, what they shared about me, who they said, oh, you need to meet this person or that person. Everything, every day ended up being different. But that's what really helped me stay connected to what God was wanting me to do. And through that, I realized this was not, it was not going to be linear work. Do this, and then this will happen. It was almost like this spiral. I would have an idea emerge and then pay attention to that for a little while, and something else would pop up, and I might have to come back around to the first thing, and then really paying attention to that, to the movement of the spirit and to patterns. That was so very important. And I think, Melissa, I see your question, and I think maybe Amy will talk about that a little bit next. Oh, am I over my time? Amy, am I over my time? Am I good? You want me to keep going?
Um, uh, yeah, it's Amy's time now.
Okay.
If you're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm just going to build a little bit on what Susan said and the question that Melissa asked about how many times you should go back to a place. And what I want to say is, I want to echo my experience is a little different from Susan's. I'm in a different context, but the the answer to that question, it's maybe not a yes or no answer. What I have learned is that things just do not happen overnight. My time is not God's time. God measures time differently, I think. We all started out, or tried to start out, where we're advised to start out, all of us in these emerging communities, to do some deep listening, which we're going to hear more about later on. But Laura's, I think, going to share a little bit more about that later. But I've learned that really little things count. Individuals count. Um, I am reminded that when I show up at the coffee shop or the park or the bar or the restaurant or wherever for an event, sometimes it's just me, and that's okay. I've had two occasions when a bartender or barista, without even a conversation with me, they just saw what I was doing. I had a little sign up that says what's brewing, because I've been doing a current events from a faith-based point of view, kind of gathering at coffee shops and breweries or bars in the evening. And I have that little sign up, and I have some, printed stuff that people can read if they want to. These employees of these places noticed what I was doing. I think I had on a t-shirt that might have made them realize that I was a pastor, and that what I was talking about. And they found me on social media afterwards, found our community, and started following us. So I didn't even have a conversation with these folks. That encouraged me to keep going. And at first, I did try, because I live in an area where there are a lot of little towns. It's a big area that is kind of my parish, basically. It includes Newton and Conover and maybe even a little bit of Hickory and Maiden and Lincolnton and Sherrills Ford and Terrell and Denver and Iron Station, all these places. So I've tried a variety of places, and sometimes it's just the presence of being there that I think is important. And if I show up and no one is there, I try to listen to the community by observing the community. Maybe I hear snippets of conversation, or I just see people who gather at a certain place every week at that same time, and I learn a little bit about the community there. And I've found that because that skeptical world that Laura described earlier, the folks that I think are attracted to these emerging faith communities, or at least to mine, are folks who have been hurt by the church. And they need to really get to know what's going on, get to know you as a pastor and the community, what it's like. So, like Susan, I've really heavily embraced being on social media. Um, I, you know, use social media, like she said, as a bulletin board for people to find things. And I encourage people to share that. So there's no pat answer to what Melissa asked about how many times do you go. I have discontinued some things, because I thought, okay, well, I've tried this long enough. I'm going to stop doing this for a while so that I could focus on something else. And I've even done some things online, including some listening sessions and one of those What's Brewing sessions. I've experimented with that online and listened to the ideas that have come from the people that have been coming to worship for some of our other events. One of those things was, well, it is, and we started doing this. It's a banned book club. I found there was a lot of interest in that. And so I just put it out there, and we're on our third book, and we will have one daytime meeting, one evening meeting, and one online meeting to discuss this book. And because I'm a church nerd, we're looking through banned books through the lens of the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. So that's kind of fun too. But this was a suggestion from someone that was attracted to our community and came to it. I guess what I've learned that it's okay to fail upwards. When I first met with one of the folks who's become a regular, I said, we're going to fail upwards. We're going to try some things and they're not going to work, but we're going to learn from it because we do learn from failures. I think I learned more from failures than I do from things that are really successful. And I'm also trying to really expand my mind to not think about the same kind of metrics that we've used in churches all these years, because I think that's a changing thing. I think, measuring success by the number of people present at an event it's only a partial count. And I know because I have my worship service that is in person, and a small number come to that. And then I have a larger number who join us online, and an even larger number who find our sermon on Facebook or on our YouTube channel afterwards. And all of those are connections, and all of those are successes, and all of those are seeds, some of which I may not see what grows from them. But I'm not just trying to attract people to my church. I'm trying to attract people to the church, to Jesus. And I feel like all of these things add up. And sometimes they do result in people coming and being a part of what we're doing. In fact, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago that her daughter had been following us on social media, and she told her mom about what we were doing. And I met with her, and she started joining us now. So sometimes it does take a little while for to kind of figure out what is worth following up on and what you should let go of. Let's see. You can learn from your mistakes too. I had scheduled pretty early on this fall, I had scheduled a gathering at a restaurant, and I didn't check on the restaurant. It was a Tuesday. So I publicized it really heavily on social media, and I have an email list. I email everybody once a week with an update, and I put it all out there. We're going to meet, and this was just for social, just for catching up with each other. And it's a restaurant I've been to before. It's kind of new in the area, and I got there a little early, and I sat on a bench in front of the restaurant. And then I got up and looked because I was not seeing anybody going in and out of the restaurant, and it was dinner time. Well, they're closed on Tuesdays. So I laughed at myself a little bit. I made this little video that talked about, well, if you're planning to join me at this restaurant, they're not open. And a couple other things happened, but I recorded that and I put it on Facebook. And a couple hundred people saw that. So a couple hundred people now knew a little something about this faith community. And that's the first step, them knowing that we're there. And they can find us using social media or come to one of our in-person events as well. So things don't always work out exactly the way you want them to, and that's okay. We fail and we try again. Um, I have been to quite a number of things that I've scheduled, and I have been the only person there, and that's okay too. Almost always, I take a picture and I post it, and again, that gives other people a chance to see, hey, what is this Lakeshore Collective? What is this emerging faith community? And some of them may become interested in what we're doing or in another church. Or they may come to me and say, hey, my church disaffiliated, but I really want like a church, a traditional brick and mortar church where there's a pulpit and the preacher's up front and there's a choir, praise band. I can also help direct them to those places as well. Um, I think every time we try something and it fails, the thing to ask is, okay, what was not right about this? Or was it the wrong timing, the wrong format, or what is next? What is this leading us to? Another suggestion from one of my persons, I don't even call them members really, because I'm not measuring in exactly that way, but they are faithful and supporting this emerging faith community with their presence and their gifts. And she said, I've noticed that some of the people that are coming to our things, they are parents of folks who are in the LGBTQIA plus community, or they are in that community. And I think it'd be good if we had a support group. And so, guess what? I started that, and I had 5 people at the first one. It's still a small group, but again, I'm aware that these are folks who are very cautious about sharing their story because they may be afraid that they're going to be judged or not accepted or whatever experiences they may have had with a church or with a pastor or a Christian might not have been good. So they're very cautious. But I think that is a good idea that came out of just one of my church members listening and observing what she was seeing with other folks in the community. And it was not for her because she's not in that category, but that is turning into one of the more successful things that we are doing. So the next thing I'm going to just lead into the next thing, after talking a little bit about how slow it is to plant these seeds, another thing to remember is that no person or church is an island. We need to work with each other. I am finding myself really leaning into our connection as United Methodists in trying to partner with churches in our area to do a few things. I feel like that's part of my role to help the community see what does it look like for United Methodists in this area. I mean, they've heard perhaps a lot of negative things. What are some good things that are happening because these folks are working together? And one of the things that I have done, there were two larger UMCs that did not disaffiliate in my area, and they accepted my proposal to do a longest night, a Blue Christmas service. And I did two, one in the middle of the day and one in the evening. And that was just for the whole community. And if you don't know what a longest night service is, at Christmas time, folks who have experienced some kind of loss, like the death of a loved one or separation from family, divorce, or change in job. Sometimes people are just not in a happy Christmas mood, but they still want to celebrate Christmas. And this was a quiet, meditative service that invited people to lean into that grief or mourning or whatever they were feeling while still celebrating Christmas. And it was very successful at these two churches. And in fact, I involved 3 other clergy persons from other churches in the area who assisted with me. And I think that paints for the community what the importance of this connection is all about. Um, we are living in such a time where people are isolated, and there's an epidemic of loneliness. There really is. We can be connected online, but people are longing to belong. And I think as we work together, we can create more of those opportunities. Um, sometimes our gatherings in the community there'll be natural spots where people already gather. When I started looking at doing the current events conversation, I looked at places that people gathered to drink coffee or just to drink whatever, or parks where people came for recreation, or restaurants where they enjoyed the food, and found that the people were already there, and used those spots and tried those out to see what kind of conversations that I can share with them. One of the places I'd started even before this appointment with, I have a Lutheran pastor friend and a Presbyterian pastor friend and some Episcopals that like to make music. And we started doing hops and hymns periodically at this one place. And from that, I had a lot of good conversations with people. And I have learned not only what it is that they're looking for in a faith community or a connection or to help them grow spiritually, I've learned a lot about what they have to offer as well. And I just think it's really, really important that when we're listening to our community and being at these places where people gather, that we're not just looking for where the needs are, but where the gifts are. What can people do? Maybe they're good cooks. I'm looking at a Lenten study that uses food, and I'm thinking, well, maybe we'll invite everybody to make something that's connected to this lesson we're talking about, and we'll share a meal together. Um, just looking at their abilities to do different things. Um, People can be, maybe they're a good artist, and we might do some artistic things. That, in fact, one of the things that I did in coffee shops and restaurants and breweries is before Christmas during Advent, we did some coloring for Advent. And I had a book that I had purchased, but then I also had an Advent devotional with some coloring pages, not coloring for kids necessarily, although they could, but it was coloring that even adults could enjoy. And I would just sit at these places and get out my gel pens and color, and people noticed. And I gave some of those books away, and that was another way of letting them know that we're here in the community and planting some more seeds. And it also tends to bring out folks that are interested in that sort of thing. In the future, if I have some artists that I come across, there are ways that we can use that art in ministry or whatever their gift might be. Um, this also all kind of ties into the whole idea of us not being alone in this. I know from past appointments and churches that I've been a member of before I went into ordained ministry, we tend to, in the church, and I'm including me because I've done it too, we tend to think, well, if it's not happening at my church, it doesn't count. I don't think that's the way things are going to work in the future. I don't think that's the way things work now, as a matter of fact. And I encourage people, okay, you're a member of whatever XYZ United Methodist Church. That doesn't mean you can't come and join us for a mission activity or some fellowship or study in another place. That as we do things together like that, we get past that whole idea of it has to happen at my church or it's not going to happen. We've lost some churches to disaffiliation, and we've lost some folks. The attrition of church attendance, some of the statistics that Laura was talking about, people are not coming to church as much as they did in previous generations. So it behooves us to work together to still provide what folks need for growth and spiritual growth and companionship and a sense of purpose and belonging. And we do that best when we do it together. I think that it's about time for Laura to talk again and talk to us a little bit more about listening. So, Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. We've mentioned listening, the importance of listening several times and in several ways already. I want us to go a little bit deeper into this really essential skill for this new context that we are in. And as we consider how we gather people for faith gatherings and for faith conversations, I think about the verse in the book of James in the New Testament. James chapter 1, verse 9 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So I could just stop and meditate all day long on that one phrase there. Everyone should be quick to listen. Listening really serves to build trusting relationships. Listening is a gift that we offer to one another. It's an expression of love and grace to spend time with each other and to attentively listen to one another. It's how we discover the gifts that we have. It's how we discover assets. It's how we discover needs that we have. It's also how we discover passions and longings that people have for their community. It's also how we learn about the places that are broken and the places where there is joy. We could also think about listening on an individual level, but we could also think about it collectively and communally as we listen to the whole of communities or the whole of a demographic in our community. I think when we listen, we also discover stories. And stories are really powerful elements in our common life, but also in our heritage and history as Christians. I mean, we have the greatest story of all. And as we discover stories within ourselves, within our communities, within individuals, we have that awesome responsibility and call to discover our stories in the greatest story, in the story of Jesus Christ, in the story of God. And so story is where we are able to connect with one another. Their stories can serve a creative purpose and a generative purpose, a formative purpose, and can even be, I think, tools for sanctification. And I think as we all grow as Christians, as the sanctifying grace of the Holy Spirit is at work within us, that Spirit continues to strengthen our identities and our calling. And often it's through stories that we see who we are, and we are able to name where we feel that God is leading us. So stories are really powerful elements, and really the way to mine those stories that we have is by listening. You've heard this saying before: God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should be doing twice as much listening as talking. A really good resource around this is the work that Luke Edwards has done in the Listening Church. That is a website that he has. He also has a newsletter. He is on staff at our conference and has done a lot of work with fresh expressions and new forms of church. You may have been to one of his sessions this week, but you would want to, I think, bookmark his website, The Listening Church. And he says that there are 3 important 3 areas of important listening that we do as Christian leaders. One is that we listen to the divine. We listen to God. And that's much of what Susan was talking about as she talked about her stories of listening for that divine nudge. The other area, the second area of important listening, is we listen to one another. We listen to ourselves. We listen to our community of believers that we are acquainted with. We listen to the church. And then the third area of listening is listening to our neighbors, and perhaps those outside, well, definitely those outside the church who may or may not be our neighbors, literally and figuratively speaking. Listening to the divine, listening to one another, listening to the church, and listening to our neighbors. And that might be a good way to think about the task of listening, and to perhaps this Lent say, make sure that you're listening to all of those areas in your life. So right now, I invite you to make some list. To do this on a piece of paper that you have in front of you, and to make a list of some possibilities and ideas for listening. So I think everyone's list may be a little bit different. So the first list that we can make for ourselves is, where can I listen to others? So we've mentioned several of these places already in our conversation. So maybe it's in someone's home. Maybe one of those nuns in that you know of in your life is a family member. And so maybe that'll happen in a very intimate setting in someone's home. Maybe it's a front porch. Uh, all of these are going to be outside the church building. Doesn't mean that listening doesn't happen in the church building, but we're trying to expand our sense of listening. Maybe it's the coffee shop. Maybe it's the restaurant. We've mentioned those a lot. Maybe it's a bar. Maybe it's a park. Maybe it's online. Maybe it's online that there's some listening that happenings, or that would happen. Maybe it is driving or walking through your neighborhood or on your street or in your community, and you may not be with another person, but maybe there is that listening and observing that you're doing as you watch and as you see uh, who is in your community and in your neighborhood. Maybe you have someone to give you a tour of a place where you've lived your whole life. Maybe someone who's just moved I'll just use Kathy, I'll use you as an example, someone that's just moved to Denton. Maybe that outside person, that outsider can give you a tour, and you listen to how they understand your community. And maybe when we are not with anyone else, maybe we imagine, what are people around us saying and doing? Where are they going on Sunday morning if they're not going to church? How do people receive strength when they are in need? Where are places where people receive help when they need it? When we ask those supposing questions and imagine how people would answer those, and then that kind of prepares us for when the opportunity comes when we can ask those questions of real live people. So those are that's one of our lists, is who, or I'm sorry, it's where we can listen. Where. The next list that we want to create is the who. Who can you listen to? Maybe there are unexpected people that you can listen to, someone that you would never imagine having a conversation with, that you seek that person out specifically. Maybe there's someone who looks very different from you. Maybe it's someone who speaks a different language, or maybe they come from a different culture, and maybe there's something that they can teach you about their language, about their world and their experience, or maybe their gift. Perhaps you would listen to some demographic information about your community, maybe through the Mission Insight resource that tells us who is in our community and gives us demographic information. There's also Google Maps and tax maps and housing and rental maps that are available in community and civic websites. Those are places where those are opportunities to listen. Perhaps we would listen to people at a community event where it's a large gathering of people, such as a festival, perhaps a march, a rally, a concert, a craft fair. perhaps there are events like that where you can observe and listen and invite conversation. Maybe there are specific groups in your community, such as parenting support groups or uh, uh, NA or AA recovery support groups. Perhaps there's a moms new to the community group or autism support, or maybe there's a woodworkers or sporting interest group. Maybe it is people who, as one of Amy's examples, a support group for LGBTQI plus community and persons. And maybe you should also listen to your own life and think about the things that you're interested in and how that could lead you to other people and other possibilities for listening. So maybe you take your grandchildren to soccer practice, and maybe there's some possibilities for listening there, or maybe there's a hobby or a talent that you're engaged in within your community that could help you connect with others. As we think about the who of listening, we also want to think about those dynamics of comfort levels, that maybe some people are more comfortable talking one-on-one with someone. I have found that people that I've connected with that are in churches that have disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church, but who want to remain United Methodist, I have found that they are most comfortable talking with me one-on-one, and that's much more difficult in a group. So you want to be aware of those dynamics. Another list that we could make together is some listening that doesn't help. So listening that doesn't help. So trying to fix someone or solve a problem may not be the best way to listen. Probably isn't. If you are thinking about the next thing that you want to say as they are sharing or talking, that's probably not the best way to listen. I do invite you at this time, if you want to share some of these ideas in the chat, ways where listening doesn't, or ways to listen that doesn't help. If you are listening for someone to see if they can serve on your finance committee or your trustee committee, that's probably not the greatest way to listen. If you are assuming that you just need to hear their story and then assume that they're going to just want to come to your church on Sunday morning and you're waiting for that opportunity to make that invitation, that's probably not the best way to listen. If you are listening but really don't want to hear some of the things they have to say, which might be things that are uncomfortable or maybe some hard truths about the church, if you then try to avoid that by changing the subject, that's probably not the most helpful way of listening. Or when we get defensive about people's criticism of the church or their difficulty with the church. Other ways, I'm trying to see what some folks put in the chat about some tips about ways that are not helpful, that are not good listening. When you really are talking a lot and that's not really good listening. Thank you. Are there any others that people would want to put in the chat? Asking yes or no. Yes, that's really good. The yes or no questions. Yeah, looking at your phone. Yes. Surfing Facebook. Yes. So here's a few stories, a few questions to get you started. This is another list that would be helpful for you to have handy. So here's some good questions to get you started if you want to be a good listener with someone you encounter. What is your story? Tell me about your story. Tell me about two of the most important things that have ever happened to you. What has your faith journey been like so far? did you grow up going to church? That can elicit a lot of listening. Have you experienced different types of church or faith communities? What have you liked? What have you not liked? For what do you yearn in the deepest part of your soul from a community of faith that would support you? What do you yearn for? What are your dreams? Especially with someone that you don't know very well, there is an important balance to achieve. We certainly don't want to do most of the talking at all. We're there to listen, but there is some things that we need to share. We do need to share some of our story so that there's a sense of balance, so that people then feel comfortable sharing their story. So part of our discernment and listening is to know that right balance. So thank you for helping me. I love those suggestions. Susan is going to now talk to us about the fifth thing that we're learning as emerging community pastors, and that is the importance of being beyond the church building. So, Susan?
Thank you. And I'm going to be brief. I'm going to give you some tips that I have learned the hard way. And so hopefully this will help you as you begin to think about possible public spaces. And we have multiple groups doing different things. So our group doing dinner on Friday night, it's important to do some scouting beforehand, check out the parking. For us, it's important that there's a vegan menu. It's important for us that there are tables that can accommodate 10 people. So those are very important for restaurants. For our hiking group, we look at the distance to drive to a park, to a particular hike. Where is the parking? Is there a restroom? Is there a place for us to gather in case it's raining? Also, what has been helpful for me, before I share on social media, will this address get my folks to where they need to go? So just making sure your instructions are clear, that you have the address. Another group meets in my home. So I will tell you what's very significant about that is to talk to your spouse, talk to your family, other people living in your home, to let them know so that you can head off any interruptions or those kind of things. Make sure you have adequate seating, all those kind of things. So I do want to touch on real quick something that Amy said. She talked about partnering with other United Methodists in the community. We are looking at partnering with the Moravian Church. They're opening up a new coffee hangout place in Old Salem. So we hope to, as soon as they open, to meet those folks and see if we can have some shared space there, since we have a little history with them. So, and that is all I have.
All right, Amy, should both of us work on this on our next part here, which is really just some practical tips, really following Susan, some practical things that everyone can do right now to begin to nurture faith communities.
Yes.
Why don't I
Yes.
start and you chime in, Amy?
Okay, go ahead.
I think one thing you can do is to find out if there is an emerging community pastor in your area and maybe have a more in-depth conversation with them. We are going to have a list of those, the community pastors on the handout that we'll talk about just a little bit. Initiate a conversation with them and learn what they're doing. You can also be intentional about participating in and promoting events of the churches and ministries in your area. Amy has mentioned that several times. So it's not just what's happening in your church building, but what is happening throughout the connection. I also think that we can really think about what are the gems and what are the places of light. I mean gems by GEMS, places, great places, places of light in your community. Where are those happening? What can you learn about those places? And begin praying for those places of light in your community. All right, Amy, if you'll take it
Yeah.
from.
I'll echo that. Looking around for places. When I first moved, I'm from the area that we moved back to, and a beautiful, wonderful, gigantic park had been built in our 6 year absence when I was serving in another appointment. And it has about 20 miles of walking trails. It has a dog park. It has a launch for kayaks or canoes. It has a fishing pier. It has a giant playground and 3 shelters with nice indoor bathrooms, a mountain bike area. It has all kinds of things going for it. People are already gathering there. So they don't know it yet, but I'm trying to hang around that park enough so that the staff get to know me. And I'm going to volunteer to be their chaplain, their park chaplain. And I have been praying for them and the people that go there because that represents a cross section of the community. And one advantage of some place like the park, in um, my daughter-in-law actually pointed this out to me because she had gone with me to some of my what's brewing sessions, and they've been at places where you have to, or you feel like you have to buy something, like a bakery or a coffee shop or a brewery or a restaurant. The park, you don't have to buy anything; it's free. And to keep that in mind, to make sure that where you're meeting is accessible to people who don't have the money to spend on extra things like meals out or a fancy cup of coffee or something, just to keep that in mind. Um, and look for the places where you can gather that don't cost anyone anything. And keep in mind some of these listening questions. One of the things that I have learned in really listening to a lot of people across a broad spectrum of age, and whether they're married or single parents or retired people or families with young children or high school children or whatever. I've talked to a lot of different people, and some of them have been involved in faith communities or churches before, but even the ones that haven't or not, or folks that really have written off organized religion, I do think that there is this deep yearning for something spiritual. And Susan touched on some of the things about spiritual practices. I think people are yearning for someone to help guide them through some of those things, like learning about centering prayer or learning about trust circles or journaling or any kind of practice like that that really helps people um, to express themselves in a way that might be outside of what they have thought of, might be coming from a church. It's a little different. It's a little
Amy,
innovative. Yeah,
Amy,
yeah, go
can I
ahead.
add something to that?
Sure.
And this doesn't really follow, but it's an addition to. So each of our gatherings, I have to constantly ask myself, what's going to be different about this? What's going to be different about getting together for dinner together? What's going to be different about hiking together? And so then I'm able to plug in those elements of here's a devotion, but also what I found very being positively received are giving homework. Maybe it's reading a passage in that centering prayer way. So giving people some spiritual disciplines to practice kind of on their own. That's been very, very well received.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Susan. And actually, one of the things that I'm doing with one of the local churches, I'm going to offer a grief group where we're going to use writing, specifically writing poetry, to help kind of process as we move through whatever loss that they've experienced. I'm going to do exactly that because we're going to meet every 2 weeks, and I'm going to give them some things that they can try every day that helps them reflect on what they're experiencing and connect with God, and to remind them that they're not in this alone, that we're walking with them. So I think that that's really great. Um, the other thing that came to mind, I guess, when Laura, when we were talking about listening yeses and nos, I think I put in the chat something about asking questions that you don't know the answer to. Too often, I think when we are asking people questions, they're like, here's an example. It's a bad one, but you don't really want to go to XYZ restaurant, do you? Well, that's a very leading question. And you can do that even in ways sometimes where we're trying to be helpful, but we lead people with our hand motions or the expressions on our face. And if we can ask a question that we can't possibly know the answer to, like some of the questions Laura listed, like what's been your experience? We don't know what their experiences are. I do think that's a very important thing to keep in mind when we are practicing some of these listening skills. Um, also, think about as we're winding down a little bit here. I want you to consciously think about one place, one area, one person, or something that you can practice on being very intentional about listening in the coming weeks, and make a note of that and check back with yourself. Have you actually done that? If you can think of just one, you may have more than one person or place that you'd like to go hang out and listen to the community.
Yeah,
But
and you could even invite a partner to be with you
right.
on that, and then you could compare your notes. I think would be interesting
Yeah, it would. It
to do
would.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while you're listening, make note of things like the park that I just mentioned. That's a great asset for our community. Or as you're talking to someone and they mention some of their interests, just kind of make a note that person is interested in repairing small machines. What could we do with that could be part of a ministry that serves the community? So just be open to not only hearing what they need, but what they have to offer or what a place has to offer.
Yeah.
I think.
Thank you, Amy. I think we're at the point where we're ready for you to put any questions that you have in the chat. And Katie is going to help us field those questions. And then I think are we going to show our resource list that will be available to everyone? Can you explain that, Katie, how that works? We've got a handout for folks.
Yeah, you're going to get an email from Havilah today or tomorrow that will have resource list and contact information for Laura, Susan, and Amy. So if you think of something and after this call, you'll be able to contact them. And you'll also have access to recordings. So if you want to watch this again, you feel like you missed some info. So I'll be on the lookout for an email from Havilah or from the conference office or whatever.
Yeah.
The handout will be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so go ahead if there are questions that you want to put in the chat, and we can go ahead and begin addressing those. We have several books on the resource list, the handout that you'll get. There's some books. There's also some links to websites and podcast articles. It is by no means an exhaustive list. We could continue to add things to that. So hopefully it gets you started.
Um, Going back a little bit, I see a new question, but I don't think I fully answered Melissa's question about how many times do you meet somewhere and no one shows up and you give up. You said 6 times, I believe, and then y'all quit. In a previous appointment, I was doing something very similar to what I'm doing now with the conversations at coffee shops and bars. And I was doing it first just in the coffee shop, and I had to do it for about 3 years before I really started seeing people consistently show up. I mean, that sounds discouraging, but what I did at the coffee shop, I enjoyed the coffee shop anyway, and I would take my laptop, and even if no one showed up, I could make good use of the time. So I don't know if there's a set time or limit to that, but um, that's kind of been my experience. And so I'm really hesitant to give something up too quickly, or sometimes I will adjust the time or the location and try the same thing in a slightly different way, if that helps at all. I bet you all want me to answer Winnie's question. How do you explain Christian church gatherings in a bar? That's a good one. People are already gathering there. And even in a previous appointment, when I first said I was going to host something called Hops and Hymns, I said, we're not trying to teach Christians how to drink beer. We're trying to teach beer drinkers how to sing hymns. So
nice.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also make it a point of telling people, and I've had people come to our What's Brewing conversations in bars. And I said, you don't have to buy anything. They also have soft drinks here, you know. So this is just a place that's a comfortable place to hang out and a comfortable seat. It doesn't come with any suggestions. And that's why I also do coffee shops too. If people have a problem with alcohol and they shouldn't be at a place like that, I always try to make sure that I do something that's similar either online, at a coffee shop, or in a park, keeping in mind making it accessible to everyone. Also, speaking of accessibility, I also really want where we meet to be physically accessible for people. So many of our church buildings, they're difficult for people who use a walker or a wheelchair or have any kind of physical disability. They can't hear. I think we need to keep in mind making everything that we do, even out in the community at places that are accessible, where they can park close enough to walk, that sort of thing, if that helps. Does that help, Winnie, a little bit?
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Okay.
Because you get
Okay.
a younger cohort when you do it in places that sell spirits, right? Because I think
Right.
part of the nun doctrine is not to be told what to do. They want to live their life. And plus, Jesus drank wine, because they tell me that all the time.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's
One
a
of
good
the
idea.
Yeah, one of the things that just kind of surprised me about having dinner in different places, we've gone to a variety of restaurants. There are tons of young people gathering on Friday evening in large groups, which tells me, because I've heard the question said, where are the young people in churches? They're having dinner on Friday night, but they're sitting at long tables. They are finding community. How do we connect with that?
Did you, excuse me, Susan, I don't mean to cut you off, but did you hear the other day Applebee's for the rewards program or something? They had uh, a card it was called a date night card. Once a week for 52 weeks, they give you a coupon for $30 off your meal, not spirits or anything.
Wow.
It took 1 hour or less for all of the cards, for everything they had to offer across the country, to be gone.
Wow.
Because that's how important something like that is.
Yeah.
Maybe, not money, but maybe, I don't know, because I'm still trying to understand secular, which is why I took this class, and what's right spiritual, because I know you're not supposed to reward people for going to church, but maybe we could give a frequent flyer card or something, and after so many visits. I don't know. I just know that
I'm
we
gonna
have to get more
experiment.
people in.
I'm gonna experiment with that, Winnie. A frequent
Yeah. That sounds
So
like
I
a
would
great
say
idea.
to that, yeah, but you get to control what the reward is. So in my case, I would love to do that and give some folks, because they are so receptive to the spiritual disciplines. Let's give them a journal. Let's give them a prayer book. Let's give them so in that way, I think you're aligning. I don't think you have to feel guilty about that reward,
Oh, okay.
robbery or whatever you want to call it, right? So.
Yeah, Amy, can you speak to Gracie's question? Because you have done some work in that area.
I have. When I first found out about this appointment, I put out on social media that I was going to be appointed to a church without walls that was going to be fully affirming and inclusive. And that alone, just making that known, about 500 responses to that. And so I've had some conversations with people online, and I've posted things so that they know that if they come to our worship service or one of our events, it's going to be a safe place for them, because these are folks that have been left out of the community, like you said, Gracie. And I can't remember if I mentioned in this group, but I also last week I went to a PFLAG meeting, PFLAG is a support group for family members of folks in the LGBTQIA plus community. And that's just the starting of a relationship. I mean, I've only been once, but to find folks that, need a spiritual home, and that and also wear out in public. I have a couple of rainbow t-shirts that say, this pastor loves you, and it makes me more approachable. I even have, we were talking about this, Laura and I were talking about this earlier, stickers on our computer. But if I go work in a coffee shop, that makes people know that I'm approachable for that part of our community, which has been so hurt. When I first announced this appointment, one of my acquaintances from high school from a long time ago, haven't seen her in a long, long time. She sent me a private message and she said, what do you mean by affirming and inclusive? She said, I'm gay. Would I be welcome? And that tells me that she's been hurt over and over and over again, but she is still deeply spiritual and is longing for that kind of faith connection. Also, a friend, when I announced on social media, she said, "Oh, we've got this Facebook group in this local area that is a group of allies for people who have been on the margins, including this part of our community." And so she invited me, and I joined that as well. Is that helpful, or is there anything else? Is that what you had in mind, Laura?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there other questions? Katie, are you getting any questions on your end? Okay.
Oh, the bling question. We're going back to, I'll tell you one thing that I gave people at a church that I've served in the past. I found these little wooden, for lack of a better term, they were little wooden coins, and I painted them and I put a cross on them. And this is when it was a new appointment, and I said, I've been praying for you. I think some form of that, something that people know that you're praying for them, that might be a very appropriate giveaway to give folks. No hands, no questions asked, no strings attached. Just, I'll be praying for you.
And
That could be pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I've been really not so much attendance, but who else in your life needs this? And so if you bring a friend, you bring someone comes because you invited them, then you can have because life happens. Perfect attendance is, it's hard to count on that, right? But they can tell a friend, bring a friend. And that's really been an important part of why we have grown and expanded, because they are telling people and they are bringing friends.
All right. I wanted to say thank you to Susan and Amy, and just appreciate working with them as colleagues. Thank you. And I am grateful for each of you and how you've spent some of your time today. And I hope that there's at least one thing that you have gleaned from this time together, and that the Lord will bless you as you go about the work of creating new faith communities. And Katie, we appreciate you being our hostess with the mostess. Are there any kind of closing things that we need to attend to?
I think just if they'll remember that they're going to get a follow-up, and they'll have a list of resources.
Yes.
It'll have those community pastors on there. Someone also mentioned missional networks. Those are good sources of doing things together in a community if you have one of those. So, and if you have any questions, both Susan and Laura and my emails are on that list that you'll be getting, and you can contact us that way.
Definitely.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie.
All right.
All right.
Have a blessed day, everyone.
Bye-bye.